Okay, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. A couple quick announcements / reminders before we start on today's material. Office hours have been posted to the course website, so Taylor, Puneet, and Luke are going to start holding office hours this week. Taylor is supposed to be in Herb Hour 218, I believe. They just haven't confirmed the room reservation yet for him. So if you want to go talk to Taylor tonight or Thursday after class, we'll probably still be in 218. I'm just waiting on confirmation of that room. So go to 218 if you need to talk to him about stuff tonight. I'll update that as soon as I get that sorted out. Otherwise, come talk to me or Puneet tomorrow if you want to. And Luke's holding office hours on Sundays, so those should be good to go. The studios, I know not everybody finished the studio last Thursday. That's okay, right? Wrap that up. Come to office hours, demo it to us. We'll get you signed off. Do it in class on Thursday. We'll get you signed off. There is no due date on that besides the final due date on the studio, which is April something. So you got lots of time to figure it out and get it done. Your first homework assignment is coming out on Thursday, so we'll talk about that more on Thursday. Is there a question?
Yeah, do you still want the survey done by a certain date?
Oh yeah, if you haven't got the survey done for last week, go ahead and just do that whenever you get the chance.
I know you said you wanted it preferably after the studio.
Yeah, preferably, but don't let it go too long. Do it whenever you get the chance. Yeah, in the back. So for the first one, you're just going to show it to one of us. That's your submission. In the future, there will be repositories set up for all these things, starting with the next studio. So you'll be able to just commit your code and submit it that way. But you're still going to have to show your work to get signed off on the studios. So you still got to find me or one of the TAs and show us your work to get credit for that. Any other questions before we hop into today's material? We're going to make some apps today. We're going to make, I guess we're just going to make the one app, but we're going to try it a few different ways just to kind of explore a little bit, show you some of the basics behind Android app development. So, oh, I forgot to pull up my slides. Let me get those out real quick. Here we go. So today, my main goal is to go through the basic structure of an Android application with you, show you the different components that make up an Android app. There's actually quite a few things that make up an Android app. The first thing of which I want to discuss with you are called activities. So this idea of an activity is really based around the idea that the way people use apps is non-deterministic, which is a very fancy way of saying that apps don't always start at the beginning, right, and end at the end. I can maybe come in at the middle. To give you an example, I'm sure a lot of you have seen this. You're doing something on your phone, right, and you come to a link, and maybe it's a link for email, and you want to send an email to that person. So you click the email link, and what happens? It pops up, and it asks you, I'm going to take you to your email client now. Maybe it's Gmail, maybe it's some other email client you have installed on your phone, right? So it's just going to pop up, and then if you select that that's what you want to do, it'll take you to the composition screen so that you can start writing an email to that email address, right? We did not enter the email address from the beginning. We entered it in the middle. If I had just opened the email client normally, it probably would have taken me to my inbox. And then if I wanted to write a message, I'd have to select compose a new message or something like that, right? But we bypassed that process. We said, no. I just want to go directly to writing an email to this particular person. That's an example of a non-deterministic behavior model for these apps. So apps are really interacting with each other all the time and sending you to other apps to fulfill duties that they can't or just don't even want to worry about. They don't need to worry. A browser does not need to worry about sending email. We have an email app for that. So activities are really based around this concept. Any activity can be used as an entry point to your application. So you are going to have an activity that is the starting point, quote unquote, right? The one that you want everybody to see when they first load up your app. But you might have more activities for other things, such as composing emails or other features of your app that people can enter in through other ways, other means. All activities in your app are tracked in something called the manifest. So let's go ahead and start up our first app, and I'll show you the manifest once we do that. I've got Android Studio already opened up. You can see my list of projects is steadily growing as I work on developing stuff for this class. We're going to go ahead and create a new project. And what name should we give it? I'll give it, I don't know, starter app. Make sure Kotlin and support is checked. We're going to hit next. I'm not going to worry about these things for right now. Those settings are actually just fine for what we want, so we'll go ahead and hit next. And this time, we want to deal with activities, right? So you can see there's lots of options to choose from, and we're actually going to do multiple activities in this class. We'll get to maps eventually. On Thursday, we're going to take a look at this navigation drawer where you've got that slide-out panel that allows you to choose different things within your app. So, we'll eventually get to more of these kinds of activities, but for now, we're going to keep things simple. We're going to start with a very basic, very empty activity. Hit next. Okay, it wants a name. Main activity is fine. This is just a little simple example, little starter app for us. I'm going to go ahead and click Finish. And this is the part where Gradle comes in and takes a few minutes. By the way, what's Gradle doing? Why is it taking so long? Well, it's looking at the version of Android that you said you wanted to use, right? Looking at the other libraries that you may have selected that you wanted to use on this project, and it's going out and it's grabbing them. It's grabbing those tools for you so that you can start developing in using those libraries. So it does take a couple minutes. While that's spinning up, I can probably find the manifest. Maybe. Here it is. The Android manifest. This is where all activities of my app are going to be listed. Right now, I just have one activity. The main activity. It's listed right here. So I just have the one activity. It doesn't even really do anything yet. We're going to make it do some stuff in just a little bit. I just have the one activity, and down here I've got what's called an intent filter. This is important. This describes what this activity is intended to handle, what kinds of behaviors, what kinds of actions can this activity handle. And so you see here, for this activity, I've got two additional pieces of information. I'm labeling this the main activity, meaning that if somebody starts my app, this is the activity that's going to begin first. This is the starting point. This is the quote-unquote main method of my app, and it's marked as such. It also indicates that this is the launcher. I mean, the launcher is actually a very similar idea. This is the activity that's going to start when my app is launched. Now, if I have other activities as part of my app, what I can do is I can go add intent filters to those things as well. And what that allows me to do is say things like, this activity is intended to send emails to people. And then if somebody clicks on an email address in a different app, it'll search your phone and say, hey, do I have any activities in any of the apps on this phone that say they want to send emails? Because that's what this person's trying to do right now, right? And then it'll find that intent filter that says, oh yeah, here it is. This is the activity that's meant to send emails, and it will present that to you as an option. So I'm not going to mess with this. For right now, this is the main activity. It's going to be our only activity until a little bit later when we'll add a second one for now. Is Gradle still going? Oh, it sure is. It sure is. It takes a minute. That's fine. While that's continuing to spin up, let's talk about the life cycle of an activity. In order to understand how activities behave, it's important to understand the state of an activity throughout its life cycle. So at the very beginning, an activity is created. So you see OnCreate is the first thing that's listed in the life cycle. An activity gets created, and then it starts. So creating and starting are two separate things, right? It creates, it starts, and then it can get paused or even stopped and then resume again. So we have the ability to pause. A lot of times what that means is navigating away from the app to something else. I've switched the window to some other part, some other app on my phone. Or I might quit it entirely. I might stop and then destroy it, get rid of it. These are the various states that our activities can be in. And this is important because these are all entry points for us as programmers to write code for activities. In other words, every one of these states that's listed here, on pause, on stop, on destroy, those are actual methods that exist on every single activity that you will ever create. And I can then, as the programmer, define behavior I want to occur at these states within my activity. So the most common one that we're going to use by far is OnCreate. OnCreate is almost always used to just basically set up the starting page of your app, right? Load up any of the stuff that you want the user to see and kick the app off. That's going to be in the OnCreate method. And once Gradle finally stops doing what it's doing, I'll show you that. Oh, perfect. It's done. So let's take a look at the simple boilerplate code that it started with, and we'll start messing around with some other stuff. You see, like I was just talking about, OnCreate. Here it is. 2 lines so far. It calls the OnCreate method of the superclass. We're using inheritance here. And then this sets the layout. So what do I want the users to see? What's the view that the users are going to see once this activity gets loaded? That's what this line of code is doing. So we use the setContentView method, and then we tell it where the layout is for this particular activity. So let's take a look at that layout next. We're just kind of following the breadcrumbs around our app. I promise we're going to start changing some things here very soon. Things like my layout are kept in a separate place. They're kept in the resources folder, RES. You can see within that folder there's another folder called layout. So if I open this up, I see activity main, which is the layout that's being referenced here in the code. And if I open this up, all right, now we see stuff that looks kind of like an app. This is the screen, right? It's a very basic, very basic screen. The text in the middle, I know it's tiny. It says Hello World. This is a Hello World app. And that's all it does. It loads up this very basic screen. This is a drag and drop editor, by the way, which I actually am more than happy if you want to use the drag and drop editor, you're more than welcome to do so. But I will say I think you should know how the text works under the hood as well. And so down here at the bottom, you have the option to switch to the text view. This is the same layout just shown to you in code. This is XML code. So we can take a look and see what this layout looks like in the code. I see a text view here. That's what's going to have my Hello World text in it. And that's it, really. Actually, I take that back. There's one other thing. There is a layout, a constraint layout. So a layout is basically a blank canvas for you to put elements into your app. There are many different types of layouts available. A constraint layout is actually a very common one. We're going to see that one used a lot in this class. So a constraint layout is basically a canvas, and then this text view is laying on top of it. If I look at this design a little bit more, you can see that Hello World has been centered. So if you look here, you can see it's been centered. Or if you wanted to verify that in text, you can see width and height is set to wrap content, which basically means just keep it centered, keep the same amount of space on either side of this particular content. Any questions so far? Because we're about to start trying some stuff out. So what I want to do is take you through some of the other parts of the life cycle of an activity real quick. So I had that chart up on the board. I've also got some things in my notes. I'm just going to put in some of the other methods, some of the other functions from the life cycle here. So, and then we'll try them out. On start. I'm not going to actually do anything here except probably just drop in a simple message saying that that's where we are, right? So for all of these, I have to call the onStart method from the parent class. That'll be our first thing. And then I'll just make a log that I was here. This is how we do debug messages, log.d, send debug messages to the log. It actually doesn't know, so log is in red. I don't know how well you guys can see that. It's in red here, so it's having trouble resolving that name. It needs to be imported. So you can import it the old-fashioned way by typing, or IntelliJ has hotkeys that make this a lot easier. If you hold Alt and hit Enter, you see I just dropped the import statement right up at the top for me? That's one of my all-time favorite hotkeys in IntelliJ. Alt and Enter will import things if they need to be, if it can find them. Did I forget something here? I need two strings. Yeah, I need a label and then a more specific. This is a tag or a label, and then a more specific message. This tag would be useful if you're trying to categorize your messages. For our purposes, it's not really relevant, but we have to include it to use the log method properly. And so I'm actually going to copy this a couple times and just do a few different parts of the life cycle. So we'll do resume, pause, and stop, which is going to be as easy as changing the method names. All right, I'll do one more, which is on stop. Is that all I wanted to do? Yeah, that's fine. There are others. This is not the complete activity life cycle. There are others here, but these are the big ones. These are the major ones that you can see. And so now what we have is a very simple app that will print out messages depending on where it is at in its life cycle. And so I want to fire this app up and try it out and see what happens. Get a feel for what these states actually represent for our app. So we're going to start up the emulator, which is something that we haven't done before. It's already set up on my computer. If it's not set up on your computer, if you haven't started the emulator before, it actually takes a little bit of time. There's a very big download that it has to do. Full, complete instructions for the emulator are included on the studio for this week. It's honestly very straightforward, like so straightforward that I probably don't even necessarily have to explain it to you. But just so you're aware, I'm using a Pixel phone. You get to pick which kind of phone you want to emulate on. I'm using a Pixel phone just because that's what I have. I think it's a good choice. And we're using, I think, the most recent version of the API, version 28. As I said, if you're trying to follow along with me right now, you're more than welcome to do so. It's just going to be a big download. So it'll take a few minutes for that to get up and running. So for the sake of time, I'm just going to go ahead and fire it up. Again, it takes a moment for this to work. Once it does, it'll pop a phone right up on my screen. Oops, that's not the app. That's a different app. That's okay. It takes a minute. You can see Gradle's still working. down here at the bottom. So it's still compiling my program and loading it up. While we're waiting for this to spin up too, it should also be noted that I can plug my phone into my computer and load apps directly on my actual hardware as well. We'll show you how to do that later on too, but it's going to be how we expect you to do most assignments and things like that. So it's still working. This is a more or less functional phone if it's alive. Yeah, there it is. Here's my home screen. Here's all my apps. I've been doing a lot of test apps on here. Oh, looks like it's done because it's loading up. Nope, that's still not the right one. It takes a while. The first time you compile and load an app up on the emulator, it does take several minutes for it to get up and running. So we just need to be a little patient. After you get it the first time, it goes much faster after that, I promise. You don't have to wait this long every time you want to compile your code. Just the first time. Are there any questions while we're waiting?
You made a lot of apps for Android other than like for Fragments course?
I have not directly made lots of apps. I've been actually supervising other people making apps. I mean, I made a lot of apps for this course, obviously. I've supervised a few independent studies that deal with Android apps as well. Yeah?
So is this class, are we going to be developing one project continuously, or is it like a bunch of small projects?
A little of both, actually. The studios all build off of each other. You're going to make an e-commerce app, a shopping app, basically, that all build off of each other. And then the homework assignments are actually a little bit more independent of one another. I actually know what they are. The first one is going to be a calorie tracker where you can type in food and it'll track how many calories you ate throughout the day. Oh, hey, it's up and running. The second one will be a grocery list app where you can search for groceries and then add it to a grocery list. And then the third one is going to be, what is the third one going to be? I forget. Oh, the third one's going to be blackjack. We're going to make a blackjack app. And we're going to do a map app. Something to do with mapping for the fourth one. So, and then your final project. All right, cool. So this app is finally started. Let's take a look at the log. If I come down here, there's an entry for the log. Is that the right tab? Or do I want the terminal? Oh, here we go. I got the right tab. Oh, so I actually didn't put in a log message for OnCreate. I should have, but I forgot. It would have showed up here. On start, notice OnResume also fired after it started. So, and then I haven't seen any other messages. Well, let's see what else we can do to get it to fire off. If I hit this button here to go to the switcher, they'll see on pause, on stop. It did stop, right? But it's not being destroyed. The app's still there. I can switch to another app, and it's still there, and I can even switch back to it. And then on start, on resume, fires again. And if I close the app entirely, which I can do through the switcher, there it paused again, and then I can close it entirely. If I'd put on destroy in here, which I didn't, maybe I should have included that method as well, I would have seen that one fire off when I exit out of the app. Again, I'm taking you through this so that you can see, right? Depending on how people interact with your app, we can use these functions as entry points into behaviors that we want our application to have. The ones that are going to be used most commonly, though, are like OnCreate, OnStart, OnResume. We're going to use OnCreate a lot. All right, let's make this app do something a little bit more interesting. Right now, it's kind of boring. It just displays a message on the screen. Let's make it a little more interactive. I want to add some more interactive stuff to the layout and use it. So what I'm going to do is a simple app that has a text box that the user can type their name into, and then when you hit a button, it says hello to the user instead of just saying hello world all the time, right? Nothing fancy, but I just want to show you how to do some basic UI stuff with these apps. So in order to add those new elements, anybody have any ideas where we need to go first? Yeah. The main activity, which part? There's two parts, right? There's the Kotlin part, and then there's the XML part. The XML part, right? That's where all of the UI elements are, is in the XML, in the resources here. So this is what I'm interested in. So again, you can do this all in XML. It gets to be a little tedious. I think what I actually prefer to do is sort of a hybrid thing where I'll drag and drop some components and then tweak it in the XML is a lot of times what I do. So I'm going to switch over to design view. Maybe. Is it stuck? Let me close this out. Okay. Just wanted me to close the app. So I want to put in a text box and a button. So if I select text, there's a whole bunch of different options here, and I'm specifically asking for somebody to put in their name, and I believe there's, here we go, plain text. That's fine. So I'll drag one of those out. You can see that's probably not where I want it to go, right? This is where things get a little finicky in terms of positioning these elements. We're going to talk a lot more about UI design as we get later on in the course. For a basic rule of thumb, at least for the first few things that we do in here, I'm not going to be too picky about how good your app looks. Not at first, anyway. As long as you're not picky about how my apps look, because they're not going to look great either. And then as we go on, we'll spend more and more time focusing on making good user interfaces, good looking apps. So for now, I'm just going to drop out a text box and a button and try and get them, somewhat reasonably placed in the app. Down here, you can see these red exclamation points. It doesn't like something that I've done. It says, this view is not constrained. It only has design time position, so it will jump to 0, 0 at runtime unless you add the constraints, which sounds kind of like a strange message. If we go take a look at the text over here, you can see that, all right, what's the difference between what this looks like and what this looks like? It's these constraints. It's these constraints. So it wants to know what the layout should be relative to other elements. And honestly, I think we could probably just use these constraints as is and copy them into the other ones. This is what I was saying earlier about how I sort of do a mix and match when it comes to UI design. I'll do a little bit with the designer. I'll do a little bit with text when it's easier for me to do so. The nice thing is if I edit the text, I can switch over to the designer and see, okay, so not exactly what I had in mind, right? They all landed on top of each other. Whoops. So that was a mistake. Let's undo that and try a little bit different. If I can. Oh, it helps if I click the wrong tab. To right of parent. Okay. Let's try a different approach here. Why does it still say that? It's not constrained. Huh. Well, anyway, another way you can add the constraints in is by using the designer view over here. You'll notice that it actually hard-coded absolute margins around the edge of this UI, which is actually probably not what you want most of the time. These sliders at the bottom are for relative padding, which is what I prefer to use most of the time. So I would say set these to 0 and then use the relatives. It's fairly similar to web design, honestly, if you've ever done any web work. And it's just going to take some trial and error a lot of times to get things exactly how you want them set up. I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent for that stuff today. But I do want to keep going with this example. So what do we want to do? I want to make it so that when they type their name into the box and push this button, that it says hello to whatever name they typed into the box. So let's tweak this UI just a little bit here. Instead of it saying the word button, we can make this say something else, like say hello. And if I want to change, the default text here, I can as well. And I've got a UI that looks okay. It's not going to win any awards, but it looks all right, which is what I was going for. It looks okay. So now we just have to hook it up. We have to make the parts work together. I have to make the button do something when I click it. Right now, the button is on the screen, and the users will see the button on the screen. But when they tap it, it's not going to do anything, because I haven't specified what I want that behavior to be. So in order to do that, I have to code up the behavior for this button. I have to specify what I want it to do. And that's going to take place back in the Kotlin side of things. I'm going to add a listener to the button. It's a click listener. It basically sits there and just waits and waits and waits and waits and waits. And when somebody clicks that button, the listener is going to notice it, and then I'm going to tell it what behavior I want to happen as a result. So let's go ahead and start that up. In order to access it, I need to know how to get access to that button in my code. The way we do that is through IDs. So if I look at the ID of this button, which is up here at the very top, it's called button, which is an appropriate name. So if I type the word in button like this, I should be able to access that button based on that ID. I want to set the onClick listener. You can see we already have a problem. It's not finding that reference to that UI element button. Okay. So the solution to that is to let it know where to find that. Basically, in order to be able to do this, we need to import the layout of the main activity into our Kotlin code. So I'll type this one out, although I probably could have IntelliJ do it for me as well. It's kind of long, actually. Main dot. All right. Let's break this line down. This is just getting us into our code of the app, right? Main is the main activity. Activity main is the name of the layout, the XML file. .star means just give me all of the UI elements that you can find within that layout, one of which is called button, and you can see now that it knows what I'm talking about. Okay, so now we have to specify what we want this behavior to do. I'm actually defining a new method. This would be called a callback method. So when the event fires, the listener is going to pick up on it, and it's going to fire off this callback. Oops. Oh, I didn't spell that right. Is my syntax off? No, it's okay. What's going on here? Yeah, let's try that. There we go. Thank you. That was it. Import view. So we're setting up a method to fire once this button is clicked. So what do we want to happen? We want to modify the text that's in the app. Yeah, question. I can try. There we go. For now, anyways, we can see the whole line. So I want to grab the value out of the text box, whatever they typed in the text box, make a message out of that, and then display it in the text view element of my app is my goal, right? Those all have IDs, or if they don't have IDs, we can give them IDs. So let's go back and take a look at our UI, make sure we know the IDs of the things that we're interacting with. This is called edit text. That's the ID for that one. This is called text view. Okay, they're kind of generic, but that's okay. They will certainly work. So I want to get the text out of this edit box. Whoops. All right. Hello? Oh, okay. I don't know why it's over there. All right. So I'll make a variable to grab the text out of the text box. I already forgot what it was called. Edit text dot, or is it lowercase? Text. What are you upset about? Ah, type mismatch. I declared this variable as a string. It was looking for an editable. All right. And this is another import. Sure. All right, and now we just need to set the value of the text view. Name concatenated. Oops, wait. I did that wrong. Hello. Name. Exclamation point. It's a little unhappy about how I went about this, but I think it's going to work. So I at least want to test it out and see what happens. So I'm going to go ahead and fire this up again. It should not take as long to compile this time. I hope not. And we'll see if the code actually does what I want it to do. Or it might crash. Is it still loading? Oh yeah, it's still loading. Okay, starter app, there it is. Whoops, did I click the wrong app? I did click the wrong app, sorry. It's still building anyway. My laptop is in danger of running out of juice here, and apparently these outlets don't work. What's going on with that? Okay, that's going to be a problem. Let's see, is this going yet? Nope, it's still compiling. There we go. Whew. Okay. All right, it's done. Let's see if we can load it up now and see if our code works. Hey, there's our new UI, so far that looks good. let's put some text in here, put my name in, and I'll click the button. And I know it's hard to see because the text is so darn small, but it does say, hello, Doug, now, where that message is. So, you know, you can put whatever you want in the box, right? And it updates accordingly. So we did it. We made an app, and it's actually got some user interactivity. Let's go out and make a lot of money. Not quite. We're not quite there yet. We got a long ways to go. But this is a good starting point. What questions do you have for me so far? I'm not done yet. We still got about 35 minutes. I want to do another addition to this app. But are there any questions so far? Yes, probably towards the end. I imagine that some of you will want to maybe do that with your final projects, and so I would be happy to discuss that with you guys. Yeah, question? Yeah, let's take a look at that. So I'm overriding this onClick, and this view is the view that has been clicked, I'm assuming, which in this case would be the button. Actually, I didn't discuss how layouts work. That's my next slide, actually. Layouts consist of view groups, which is just a collection of UI elements, and then views, which is a slightly misleading. You know, a lot of people hear the word view, they think of model view controller kind of stuff, right? A view in this case is just a UI element. So all UI elements are going to inherit from this view class: buttons, text boxes, things of that nature. So the view in the case of the click handler is the thing that has been clicked. If I wanted to get some information from the button, I could access it through that object. I didn't need to for this particular case, but I could. Great question. Any other questions? Any other questions? All right, let's take this a step farther. So I've showed you activities. I've showed you some layouts. We did a very, very basic layout with some very basic UI stuff. There's actually another component that, another building block that you're going to see a lot in these apps. Actually, you can go a long way with just activities and layouts. In fact, up until, what version of the API was that? It was a few years back, I want to say like 2015, 2016, somewhere in that range, where activities and layouts is what you had. That's it. That was an Android app, activities and layouts and interacting with each other. But then they introduced another building block, another concept for people to use called a fragment. So let's talk about those real quick, and I want to update our app to use fragments as well as activities. So a fragment is really just a reusable subset of an activity. So I can think of an activity as being composed of one or more fragments. Now you'll notice I don't have to use a fragment. I don't use any fragments in the app that we have right now. So fragments are not required. But as apps get larger and larger and do more things, you're more than likely to see these fragments come into play. So there's a lot of different ways they can be used. One way, the way you see illustrated here, is for targeting different form factors. If I have an app that I want to run on a tablet and a phone, right, by using fragments in a clever way, I can have two fragments side by side on a tablet, but then switch back and forth on the phone because there's less real estate on a phone, right? Fragments can allow me to do that. They're contained within the same activity. That grouping is important, but they're still distinctly separate pieces of my app. Fragments also allow reusability. So it's a very modular building block, a fragment is. So I can reuse the same fragment in many different activities, which is actually what I want to show you next, how to reuse a fragment across multiple activities. So it just provides a greater deal of flexibility to our apps. And just like activities have a life cycle, so do fragments. And so you'll look at these. Some of these are going to feel the same as the activity life cycle that we saw. It's a little bit longer, so there's a little bit more involved. You see OnCreate is up there, but it's not the first thing that's up there, right? OnAttach is the first thing that's up there. So every fragment belongs to an activity. So OnAttach has to do with when that fragment is associated with an activity. What activity am I associated with? What activity am I attached to? Right? So then you see the rest of them, a lot of the rest of them are similar: pause, stop, resume, start. On activity created. So a fragment's not really viewable until the activity itself has been created and is viewable. So I have a lifecycle event for that as part of my fragment. And so we'll use these methods as entry points into our fragments, just like we were using the methods as entry points into our activities. And so what I'd like to do with the rest of the time that we have, I think we should have enough time to do this, I want to make a second activity for our app. So I have the hello activity right now. I want to make a separate activity to say goodbye, right? I have a whole second screen, and it does a very similar thing. It just says goodbye. And there's going to be some pieces of those activities that are in common to one another, namely the text box where I enter the name and the button. Those are going to be in common to both activities. So I want to encapsulate those in a fragment and then reuse that fragment on both activities to show you that I can take that same piece and use it in many different areas. So let's go ahead and get started with that. I'll close the emulator for now. First thing I'd like to do is create my fragment. Fragments feel a lot like activities. They have Kotlin code associated with them. They have a layout associated with them, right? So in order to create that fragment, I'll right-click in my project, come down here and select New, Fragment, and which one do I want to choose? I'll just do a blank one. All right. And this fragment's going to contain the text box and the button, so I'll call it text button. I don't know. Not the best name in the world, I guess, but it works. All right. Just like we had for our activity, right? Here's the Kotlin for my fragment, and then down here is also a layout for my fragment. So I now have to design these pieces. I usually like to start with the layout. I know what needs to go in here, right? The text box and the button need to go in here. Actually, before I can put any of those in there, I need to provide a proper layout. So I'll just use a constraint layout, since that's what we've been using so far, as my starting point. Maybe. There we go. Oh, it's already got a frame layout. I'm sorry, it was just loading still. I didn't give it a chance to load. Well, I'm going to delete that and do a constraint layout instead. Maybe. It'll let me. Or maybe a frame layout would be okay, I don't know. I guess we could try a frame layout, that's fine. All right. Plain text. Oh no, frame layout's not going to be fine. I really need the constraint layout because that's what allows me to specify positioning. All right, I'll do this the hard way. Get out of here. Constraint layout, and then, hello? Okay then, I'll go steal code from my other layout if you're gonna fight me. Actually, that's not a bad idea because a lot of what I need is already here. So let me just grab all of this. Yeah, I'll just grab the whole thing. Forget it. Okay. That'll save some time. There we go. Perfect. All right. So all the stuff that was part of our activity before is now part of our fragment. And eventually I'm going to create a separate activity and then use the fragment inside of that activity. In fact, we can do that now, as a matter of fact. I'll go into my main activity. This is no longer relevant. All that stuff that was on the main activity is no longer needed. I want to use the fragment instead. So you'll actually see, you could do this in code if you wanted to, or up here, there's an option for fragment that you can click and drop. Which fragment do you want to use? Well, I only have one, so that's the one I'm going to use. And it will add that, shoot, I forgot the layout again. Gosh darn it. Shouldn't have deleted that part. Got a little hasty with the deletion. Can I undo that part? Keep the constraint layout, get rid of everything else. Okay. Now I can stick my fragment in there. Yes, beautiful. Okay. Got my fragment. We'll set it up to float like so. Okay. And what I'm going to do next is create another activity for my goodbye activity, and then I'll do the same setup. I'll put the fragment in that activity as well. Basic activity, is that the one that I used before? I think, no, I used empty activity before, didn't I? Goodbye. All right. We'll wait for Gradle to catch up here just a second. Here's my goodbye activity. It's already got a constraint layout, and I'll drop the fragment on there as well. Set up the margins. Okay. Is everybody with me so far? Are there any questions? Did I lose anybody? I now have two activities. They actually look very similar for now, but they both have the same fragment on them. So those UI elements are going to be set up on both activities, but I'll be able to define different behaviors for that fragment for each activity. That's sort of the magic of using fragments. So our next step then actually is to define how that fragment behavior works. And this is where things get a little bit complicated. I'll try and walk through it step by step as best as I can. I'm going to open up the code for my fragment. You'll see that it actually inserted a bunch of starter code in here with a bunch of to-dos. Honestly, I don't need a lot of this stuff. Like, it's just not necessary for this particular example, so I might scrap some of it as we go. But there are some things that I actually do care about and that it gave to me. For example, this function right here, OnAttach. Remember that OnAttach is what happens when a fragment becomes associated with an activity. So when this function runs, that means that I know who my parent is. I know what activity I'm now a part of, which in our case is either going to be the hello activity or the goodbye activity. The context is actually the activity itself, right? Who is in charge of me right now? Who is my parent? So I'm going to keep track of that for later. That's what this listener is. It's going to keep track of who its parent is so that if I need to interact with that activity at all, I have a way to do so. I have a way of talking to that activity. Let's see here. That communication is actually going to be necessary for us, or is it? How did I set this up? because of the way that the activity is set up, I made a mistake with my fragment. Sorry. I want to take this text box out and have that be part of the actual activities. Text view here ish, and then I'll put one in my goodbye activity as well. All right. So we do need to communicate between the fragment and the parent activity, because when they hit that button, I need to take the name out of the text box, which is in the fragment, and pass it to this text view, which is going to be in the activity. It's going to be in the parent, and have this message be updated in the parent. So now when I click that button, I'm actually sending information to the parent activity. So it's not going to be as easy as setting up that on-click behavior like we did in the previous example. We need to communicate from our fragment to the parent activity. The way that we do that is in the fragment code, we're going to create an interface. Actually, it's already created this interface for us on fragment interaction listener. That's a very verbose name. I can now create any function that I want inside of this interface, and that function is going to be the function that gets executed on the activity side when the button gets clicked. So what do I want to happen when the button gets clicked? I want the name in the text box to get sent to the parent activity. So I'm going to update this to pass a string, oops, for the name as part of this interface. And then it is now the activity's responsibility to implement this interface and then implement this function within this interface. So inside of main activity, I'll implement the interface by putting, gosh, that name, the interface name was huge. What was it? On fragment interaction listener. There we go. Oops. What did I do wrong now? Text button. That's what I called it. All right. So I told it to implement the interface from the fragment. And now I can, I don't know why it's mad at me right now, but I can tell it to, do I have an extra bracket? Yes. Now I know why it's mad at me, because an interface, once I implement an interface, I am now obliged to implement any functions within that interface. There's only one function in this interface, though, which is on fragment interaction. So I can go ahead and implement this. It's passing me the name, so now what I need to do is pass it to the text box. Is it not? Oh, it's lowercase. I do that a lot. There. Let me pause here for a second and make sure that it's clear what I've done so far. The way that fragments and activities interact is through an interface. The fragment defines an interface. This is the format of the data that I'm willing to output to you. Right? The activity that I expect to be the parent of the fragment implements that interface and then does whatever it wants to with the information that's being passed from the fragment. That's what this piece is. It's implemented the interface and then implemented the function to update the text view. The last piece that we need to do is set up the actual button click. in the fragment. And the way that we do that is by calling this method from the parent when the button is clicked. So that's going to be our onClick event this time around. It's important to consider when we should do this, though, in the fragment lifecycle, because this code is in the activity. So if we go back to the fragment lifecycle real quick, just for a moment, the fragment wants to call code that's in the activity. And in the lifecycle, it looks like I'm not able to do that until I get to that onActivityCreated event. So I'm going to add that to my fragment. I don't believe it's already in here. Is it? No, it's not. OnActivityCreated. You always have to call the super. And then what I want to do is set the onClick listener to be the function in the parent. So the button is called, what's the ID of the button? It's called button, go figure. What's the text box called? It's called edit text. All right. There we go. The only issue that it has is the same one that I had last time, where I need to import the layout so that it knows where to find these guys. So it'll look very similar to what we did before. Okay. I don't need this anymore. We just fixed that. Where was the code that I was looking at? Why is the override not happy? Override's nothing. Did I spell the... Oh, I see. It's got a parameter. That's why. The signature was incorrect. Needs to match. Okay. And I believe we're actually ready to try this out and see if it actually works. Now, I've only done it for one activity. I haven't done it for the second activity. I've got enough time to get that up and running. But real quick, let me just review what happened. I created a fragment. It's got some of my UI elements into it, but I needed a way of communicating information from the fragment to that activity. So we used an interface defined in the fragments. We implemented that interface in the activity. And then because the fragment knows who its parent is, we're able to call that function on the parent when a button is pressed. I know that's kind of a lot. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
So all of the code that we wrote for the activity last time that we now moved to the fragment, all the buttons to the...
So this code here?
Yeah, we need to get rid of that.
Yeah, it's no good to us anymore. Yep. That's right. Great observation. There is still an error down here, but actually we didn't even use this stuff, so I'm just going to delete it. That's part of the deal with Android Studio, is it does give you a lot of boilerplate code and you don't always need it. So you end up scrapping it in those situations to make it happy. Oh, I have the same type mismatch that I had earlier. It's expecting a string, but it found an editable. I should have just made this editable, I suppose, instead. and then this will have to update to be editable as well. There we go. The good news is that, so I already did this once, and remember we have 2 activities. I have the goodbye activity as well, but the good news is that the goodbye activity is now very straightforward to use. It just has to implement the interface and then define the behavior, just like I did here. So in the goodbye activity code, it's actually very straightforward. Implement the interface, and then define the behavior. Gotcha. And so the text view for this one is called text view, go figure. Goodbye. And I have to import that stuff again. There we go. All right, let's test it out. Let's see if it works the way that we expected it to. So this is the old version. It's still compiling and building the new version. It'll take a moment. Are there any questions while we're waiting for this? I understand this was a relatively complicated example. That's part of the development. Developing Android apps does not feel very much like developing the Java apps that you're probably used to in other classes. It's a much different paradigm. It's a much different way of thinking about the world, thinking about how you interact with the world. It's going to take some getting used to. That's why we're going to get you a lot of practice in Studio. Just to give you a sneak preview of what's coming up on Thursday. On Thursday, we're going to introduce you to the drawer navigation activity and actually have you set one up using Fragments. So it's going to be a little bit different than what we've done today. Today, I had 2 activities that shared a fragment in between. Right? On Thursday, what we're going to have you do is a little different. You're going to have one activity, and then when you choose a different option on the drawer menu, it's going to swap out a new fragment into the... So you have one activity with a lot of fragments as opposed to a lot of activities that share fragments. We're trying to show you the flexibility of fragments and activities, how they can be used together in different ways. Is this thing still going? Go. Almost there. Well, okay. Whoops. Well, my text view is up there. That's not good positioning, but let's at least see if it works still. Okay, so it still works. The text view is, the positioning's off. I understand that I had screwed that up, but the interaction between, remember, this is a fragment now, whereas this text view is actually part of the activity. So there is now communication happening between this fragment and the activity. Now, the problem, and we have just enough time to solve this problem too, is how do I get to the other activity? I have a second activity that I want to get to. I don't have a way of getting there. I don't actually have a way of getting to the second one right now. So let's wrap things up today by showing how to navigate from one screen of your app to another. I actually already have the activity created. I just need to have a way of getting there. So I'm going to add one more button to my layout that I can use to navigate to the next to the next screen. If it'll let me. There we go. Drop it down here at the bottom. Goodbye. Goodbye. And so when I click this goodbye button, I want it to take me to the other activity that's going to say goodbye instead of saying hello. So let's go back to our code, and this is the part where I wish that I'd kept that onClick event, but that's okay. We'll go ahead and put it back in, which is what we need to do. So OnCreate, I'm going to grab the goodbye button and set the onClick listener again. I've already done something similar to this before. Brackets. We need to override the onClick. Again. And here's where the magic happens. So to get from one activity to another, we're going to use an intent. We've actually seen that word intent pop up already, right? That's what we use to describe what an activity is used for. It's also how we get from one activity to another. So if I know exactly what activity I want to navigate to, we call that an explicit intent. I'm going to create a very explicit intent and go to that place. That's what we're about to do right now. What I was describing before, where you come across an email and your phone wants to find an application that can handle that, that's what's called an implicit intent. I don't know exactly where I want to go. I know what I want to do, and I'm letting the phone find an application that can fulfill that need for me. In this case, we know where we want to go, so I'm going to create an intent, which is just an object. I need to specify where I'm coming from, right, which is this, although sometimes we'll be even more explicit and say, okay, it's a main activity, right? That's where I'm coming from. And then I need to specify where I'm going, which is going to be the goodbye activity, or just goodbye is what it's called. And there's a little extra syntax that we have to stick on here, right, to specify that we're headed towards that activity. And then we just call start activity on the intent. Probably need to import the intent object. And there we go. I've created an intent. This is the context, where I'm coming from, where am I headed, the goodbye activity, and then start that activity. There we go. Let's try it out. I'm going to post all of this online as soon as class is over, by the way, so that you can use it on your upcoming project and your upcoming studio. It's going to take just a moment to run here. Now, the nice thing about using activities, which I'm about to show you, is that things like the back button just work the way that you expect them to with activities. It's very straightforward. I don't have to do anything extra. If I'm using fragments instead, which we're going to be doing in Studio on Thursday, we're going to be using fragments instead of activities, then I actually have to go in and specify, for example, what I want the back button to do when I push it. Because it wants to go back to the previous activity by default. But if I'm swapping fragments around, I have to specify that in my code so that it doesn't send me back to the wrong place. All right. Oh, man, my button placement is bad. I have really struck out with that today. Let's click it. All right, it took me to a different activity. If I hit back, it'll hopefully take me back to where I was. Yeah, it did. I know my UI looks terrible. That's my fault. But the functionality works, and if I type something in here, it should say goodbye now, Yeah, it does. I'm on the goodbye activity instead of the hello activity. So we have successfully navigated from one activity to the next. If I'm on the launcher activity and I hit back, it just takes me back to the home screen, right? So the back button's already wired up. If you're using activities, it's already wired up. It behaves exactly how you would expect. Question?
So in the OnCreate, when you made the goodbye button, did you have to import anything into the main activity in order to reference goodbye for the
I did not, because when I imported the layout, I imported star, which is everything on the layout. So when I added new UI elements to that, they were automatically imported as a result. Now you can import, specific UI elements if you want to, but I usually just import everything so that I can reference it. There's other ways of referencing these objects as well, these UI elements as well. For example, I could have also done r.layout. Oops. Activity goodbye. Well, no, I used the wrong string to get there. There are other ways of, let me take this import out and see. r.id.goodbye, sorry, I was using the wrong thing. So, well, that must have pulled up the activity though. Well, did it? It's unhappy about my on-click listener when I do it that way. I prefer to use the import way of getting access to my UI elements. That's how I prefer to do it, because I can just write that import line once and immediately have access to all my UI elements. But there is a different way through that R global variable. Was there another question over here that I saw?
Those three buttons, like back and those on all Android devices.
Yes, they are on all Android devices. Where things get a little weird is that on some phones, I think mostly older phones, those buttons are actually hardware buttons on the bottom, whereas the ones that we saw are software buttons on the user interface. They behave the same though, regardless. And when you set up an emulator, you actually choose what model phone you want to use, so it'll display them appropriately given the model phone. Is there another question that I saw? Yeah.
Yeah, so you had two different text views, right? You had like one for the main activity.
I did, yes. I did. The layout was not the greatest. I screwed up the positioning of them, but there were in fact two. Yes.
Okay, so it wasn't changing the hello text to goodbye Doug. It was just getting rid of the hello and adding it.
Well, actually, so there's two different activities. They look very similar, right? They each have their own text view that's being manipulated separately. So that same fragment is actually manipulating two different text views and two different activities based on how I coded it up. That's one reason why fragments are so powerful. I can use that same module and have it provide different behavior and different activities depending on what I need it to do. I know this is kind of a trivial example, but that's one reason why they're so powerful. Oh, we're out of time. If you have more questions, I'll stick around for a few minutes. Thanks for your patience today, guys. I did record this. I'll post the video as soon as I get home tonight. So.